Okay. Hi, Bonnie. Thank you for letting me come in today so that we can kind of reflect and do a post-observation together on the lesson I got to see last week about the three little pigs. I brought in for you, we're going to just work through together our post-observation reflection form. And this is a chance just for us to get to have a conversation about your teaching, about your students' progress, and just work together to see are there any areas that we can improve on, that we can look at your strengths and increase those more, and also just look at any changes that we can make in the classroom to make it more effective for you as a teacher and also for the students.
Wonderful.
So as we take a look just kind of at this first section, I just wanted to know, just have you check in on kind of when you reflect on the lesson that you did, how much do you think your students were productively engaged in the lesson?
As I reflected on the lesson, I felt that the students were very productively engaged. They were able to listen to the story, they were able to retell the story, they were able to do that with a partner. They followed sort of the ability to go through the story step by step using the picture cards. If they needed help, we were able to step in and help them. They also were able to then move to a paper bag activity and cut and glue that, so they were practicing some
Fine motor skills.
Okay. And then later we did a push and pull science activity with little pigs where they pushed them and they pulled them, and we extended it in a small group, and so I felt they were totally engaged with the science of push and pull as well. So I thought they really had a good lesson.
Good. And one thing I wanted to show in our clip here, so I've been able to come into your classroom more than one time during a story time, and so I wanted to show you just a little bit of when you got going here. And once you started this, any little conversation stopped, and their eyes were on you, their bodies were still, so I wanted you to just be able to see that. And I'm going to pause it right there. One thing that got skipped over right there, this is a point where you did, I was going to bring this up later, did a really good job of identifying what the objective was for the lesson. And you have that clearly stated on your lesson that you turned into me. The students will be able to retell the story of the three little pigs. And then before you start into the story, you reference visuals that I see up on your board that were part of the story, and let the students know that that's what they were going to be doing. But I wanted to show that just to support that they were engaged during the lesson. So during this part, they were all facing you, their eyes were on you for the story piece, and that continues. So that was good to see that their focus was there. We'll go back to that. So I agree, during that on the rug time listening to the story, they were very into that story. And we'll talk about it as far as meeting your standards too, but stating the goal specifically to the students was very powerful as well. Do you feel like your students learned what you intended them to learn? So we talked about that your goal was that they could retell the story. So do you feel like the students were able to do that?
Not all of them.
Okay.
Most of them were able to retell the story and verbalize what happened first, next, then finally. A few of them had trouble putting the cards in order, so I helped them put them in order.
So that was kind of, you did a little bit of changing your instruction as you went, so some of your students needed just more support to accomplish the task?
Exactly.
Okay. And for those, I noticed even in the video that at that point you went to those groups, you took the cards and you modeled it with them again.
How to put them in order.
If, I'm going to kind of just address that. One thing I wanted to know is if you altered your goals or your plan as you taught the lesson, and if so, why did you? And if you didn't, kind of what kept the flow going for you?
I didn't really alter my plan. We always, with little ones, want to model. And so you spend a lot of time modeling what you expect. And for the TK group, we definitely have to model more than once. So I modeled it on the apron, but then I also modeled it on the floor for the groups that I knew. And you can tell which ones are going to struggle. So for those that were having trouble, I modeled it again. was sort of always in my plan.
Yeah.
This is what I was going to need to do with them.
Yeah, so that was kind of built in. If you had an opportunity to teach this lesson again to the same group of students, what would you do differently?
I think I would probably go with fewer cards.
Okay.
So,
and your reason for the fewer cards?
Just
so
because
I noticed you have the cards out here, so it looked like there's, for kind of each sequence, there's 3 cards. So the house in its completion, the house under destruction, basically, and the pig that was involved. Okay.
And I might just not necessarily have it completed. I would probably just have the pig and the destruction of the house, because that would give them fewer cards. And for our little ones who are struggling with putting things in order, 3 cards is too many. So I would go with 2 cards.
Okay.
And just make it so that it was very simple.
Okay.
2 cards per pile.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing to do with your students. I could see that some of them got confused with the Norma house versus a house that was blown down. They weren't kind of sure which one to place.
Right. And I think that if we just went with fewer cards, they would be happier.
Yeah.
And they'd be more successful with putting them in order.
Great. So that's a great way to just reflect on your teaching. That's so important for us to take a moment to just get to do. And I love getting to hear from you the pieces that just really stood out to you. So I want to walk us through just when we met together in our pre-conference, you selected some standards from the California Standards for Teaching. And the first one was in Strand 2. And the goal was to establish and maintain standards for student behavior. And I want to just kind of walk through a few things that stood out in the lesson, and also then just work on some recommendations together for each of the 3 standards. So I was able to show earlier, I jumped to the video clip. A strength I really saw in you was that you clearly stated that objective. And we kind of already prior to this saw that you showed in the video, you referenced it at the end of this. You're going to tell me what's first, what's next, what's then, and final. And that's so important to do because we want all of our students, TK is important to us as well as all the way through 5th grade, and you're modeling what we want to see in every grade, which is kind of showing them the path that they're going on through the lesson and where they need to be at the end. So laying that foundation now with your TKers really benefits all of our students' growth here at San Benito. So that's a great thing to continue to do in your teaching. One thing as far as maintaining standards for behavior, I noticed multiple times, this is something I tried to tally on my notes as I went, that you gave redirections for students that were talking. And you gave redirections of having hands to self. A few times in the story, the students start to call out. And I'm going to see if I can find that little part here and then kind of connect this to some pieces of some ideas here. About 9 minutes and 45 seconds. So students were doing a really nice job of sitting on the rug and listening to the story as it went through on CD. They were engaged by the pictures. And then a little ways in, they started to kind of get restless here. So they loved the part of in the story when they're calling out. So right here they start responding, and then they start talking to partners. So what's great about this is they have a very engaging story. So I know at one point it was hard to hear one of them calls out based on the picture, "Oh, my butt's on fire," and they giggle. Natural thing that our students, are going to be doing. I would say, so it's kind of that piece in there is they're smiling, they're laughing, they're starting to call out. Those are ways that they can respond to the story, but I feel like it needs to be with structure. And one thing I noticed while they were doing this, to help maintain just the behaviors of the classroom, it's hard when they don't know when it's okay to call out and respond and when they're supposed to be quiet. And I think in a story like this, it's very engaging. They naturally want to call out. But if you let them call out here, then when you're doing lessons later on and they're calling out and they're being redirected or losing a sticker for it, it gets confusing for them. So I thought since your students naturally want to call out during this point, to include that into your lesson. So part of what you could be doing is when you first get to the I will huff and I will puff and I will blow your house down, you could say it once. You could pause the CD and you guys could say it all together with inviting them to say it. Class, I would like us all to say now. So let's do it all together. So that gives them the verbal permission that they can call out. And then you can say it in fun voices. I will huff, I will puff, and I will blow your house down. And then remind them, voices are now at a 0. I'm going to go back to the story. Then you can kind of maintain them not calling out until you get back to that point. Okay, this is time where I need everybody's help. We all get to call it out again. Here we go. I will huff, I will puff. Because it's a great time for them to be participating in those repetitive phrases that help them with story comprehension. I think because we have TK students, our kids want to move naturally. So if you can build that into your lesson where they have some kind of call and response and even a movement with it, then they know it's coming. And I think that helps to have less students calling out because they naturally want to give you that input, but you could just build it in. So that's one thing I saw. About the time they started getting restless was that huff and puff time that next time you could draw them
build it in.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
As far as, and I think the main thing of why I put this in the standard for student behavior is I think you have to really enforce the rule of kind of no calling out. And one way to do that is just to be very specific when you want them to participate. I've noticed just even within my own teaching that often I've asked a question and then kids start calling out and then I'm going, oh, you forgot to raise your hand, but I didn't say raise your hand when you know whose house fell down first. And so just training ourselves to do that, and I think in this situation would be great for the students. I again noticed you giving that redirection, correcting with positive praise. So I really liked in your teaching how I saw you several times say, I like how blank did this. We always want to give that praise in a cycle that's going to point out the choices that we want to see. I like how so many students are sitting crisscross applesauce on the rug. I like how you turned and did your partner talk instead of calling out specific names or one behavior. And so I've watched you do that and I've watched you grow in that. So continue to do that piece. A little bit later on in the story, we had, again, when they were starting to model the retell, was another time that two of the girls started kind of calling out and talking from across, and I think that's another spot that you can be able to enforce. Look at how many groups are seen with a 0. And so just using those, tighten that up, I think will help. As soon as one group is kind of allowed to do this, I've noticed in the rest of yours kind of join in. And I think this standard, establishing and maintaining standards for student behavior, is really tied into the next one that we're going to talk about later, which is just planning and implementing your classroom rules and procedures. So one thing is just with your lesson plan, it was great. You really had thought through your lesson, and it was standards-based. So even with the TK students, you're doing a good job of implementing standards that are pre-readiness skills for them, staying a clear objective, and I saw that through the observation that those were very clear of where you wanted your students to go. And so having that written and clear objective is great. During the lesson, just a way to maybe help with the routines and procedures, I noticed that during the lesson you sat in one place during the whole story. And I think we've kind of already seen it, and we just see it from the visual here, that you stayed in this one spot kind of during the whole story. This kind of came up in your reflection as well as just kind of incorporating movement. So one procedure I think that would increase the engagement of your students is just to change your position. Okay. So during this part, one thing that you can be doing just across your time with the students is train your students to follow you with their eyes. I would say eyes and patellas, and I teach them the kneecaps are the patellas, and they like that fun word. So anytime that I move, their bodies have to move as well. So for this,
keeps them engaged.
It keeps them engaged, and it changes it. Builds in a little bit of natural movement too. So my thought here when I'm watching you do this, if they were trained that every time you moved, they moved, then you could start here. You had their focus really well. As soon as you start to see them wiggle, move to the next side of the rug and stand there and do that for a few pages. You kind of see some wiggling, you move yourself to the other side. So playing with those four corners of your rug and moving your body, then they have to naturally turn with you. And that's just a way to keep them moving and help keep them engaged. That goes back to a procedure of training them at the beginning to when I move, your eyes stay on me and your patellas follow me.
Okay.
Is that something that you feel like would have helped during the story time?
Absolutely. If I'm moving and then they have to sort of focus on, oh, I have to move my body, then that is changing the direction of their brain slightly.
Yeah.
And changing the focus slightly, and they're engaged more with the story. So that would absolutely work.
The phone will pause this for a minute. We have a phone call.